Okay, this will be a short video on how to do both integer and, well, Boolean, but I suppose that would also be string validation in .NET Console. So let's go ahead. Here's a program. And so if we're going to do this, the first thing we need to do is kind of create some variables. So we'll go ahead and create a string variable. We'll call it user response. That's our nice generic. And then let's first start with the integer validation. So let's create an integer. We'll call it age. And so what we're going to do is we're going to ask the user if what their age is, and they're going to provide that to us as a string. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go and take a look at that string and validate it or confirm that indeed it is a string. And to do that, we're going to use a do while loop. And so we're going to create a Boolean variable that will allow us to bail out of that. And so that's going to be valid response, like that. All right, cool. Now that we have that, let's go ahead and use Visual Studio's do while snippet. So that's a DO, and then hit tab. And we're going to put down here, we're going to keep looping. And so we're going to keep looping as long as we don't have, or I should say, as long as it's not a valid response. Okay, so valid response, if valid response is true, then not true is going to be false, and it's going to fall out of the loop. And I'm just going to put space down here. And if valid response is false, i.e. they have not given us a valid response, then not valid response is true, and we're going to keep looping. So that's kind of how it works. It's angry with us right now, and the reason being is the precompiler is sitting down and saying, hey, you know what, you have not explicitly assigned a value to valid response. Just so you know, interestingly enough, there is a default value for a Boolean variable, and that is false. Okay, so let's go ahead and cdub, tab, and we're just going to do a really simple prompt like that. Okay. And then we're going to assign to user response. We're going to assign what we get from the console dot read line. Okay, so we're going to take that value from the console. Those guys over there, they're going to return us a string. All right. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take advantage of the try parse. So remember that the parse gang, if I give them a value, a string that does not have an integer value in there, so the int parse guys, if I give them a value that does not have a string, an integer, then they're going to get really angry and crash the program. We like to use the int.tryParse gang because they're pretty cool about not getting something that we're specifically looking for. And in fact, they do two things for us. One is they take a look at the string that we gave them, and they peek at it and say, yes, there's an integer in there, true, or no, there is no integer in there, and they send back a false value. So they send back a true or false value depending on whether we actually gave them something that they could convert or parse. And then the other thing that they do is they actually will, if they can parse it, or they will actually take that value and assign it to a variable. Okay? But what we want to do is we want to capture first that little peek that they're going to do and find out whether there is indeed an integer in there. So we're going to say that valid response is equal to, and this one's going to be an int.tryParse. And the first thing we always do, and you can see it down there, string. We give them the string that we want them to look at, and that in this case is user response. And then we say, okay, if you find an integer in there, I want you to kick it out. And where do we want them to put it? Well, let's go ahead and stick it right in age. So we're all good there. Okay? So there is a statement, and it actually does quite a bit for us. Now, the next thing we need to do, because we're going to keep looping, because if valid response is false, we're going to kind of keep looping. And if we ran it right now and we didn't have valid response from them. In fact, I'll tell you what, let's run it and see how it kind of behaves. So I put age in here. See, it's on a different line, so I'm going to take care of that. That always bothers me. But let's say I put in G. I get age again. RT. Oh, how about if I type in 7? Okay, it's just really not happy with me. And the other thing is, I'm not really sure why it's not happy with me, because it seems like I should be able to type 7 in, and it can't figure that out. So let's go ahead and close this out. I'm going to change this to a right, just because I like to have my cursor, it's just me, I like to have my cursor on the same line as my prompt. And so what we need to do now is to give the user a little bit of feedback. So we're going to say, well, if not valid response, so if we didn't get something from the user that we can actually use, let's go ahead and give them a little bit of information. So we're going to give some really simple information that just says, please enter a number, and if we wanted to, we could even, give them an idea of what we're talking about, kind of like 1, 2, 3.4, I don't know, -5. So you don't have to do that. I always like to kind of give them a little bit of pop, and I'll close that off. So they have a sense, so i.e. they understand that they can't just type a number, or I should say spell a number. Okay, so once we have that, and then the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put a CW in here. Okay, so console write line. That's going to give me a blank space. So let's see how this now behaves, how it feels. So it says age. Okay, my cursor's in the right spot. I'll put 10. It says no, please enter a number like this. I'll say, well, all right, I'll go 7 because I'm still a little slow. Please enter a number. Okay, let's put 4. All right, and it kind of falls out. So we know at this point that a proper number has been entered. So let's go ahead down here and actually kind of echo that number back. So we'll do a little CW, tab. I'm going to put a blank space in there, and then we'll put another CW, tab, and we'll do our interpolation, and we'll kind of echo back that number to the user. It appears that you entered the number, and we'll put some braces in here. There we go. And let me see if I did that correctly. It should be able to find age. It does. Okay. And then the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of put our usual pause in here. So I'll put CW, tab, and I'll just put CW, tab. We'll type press any key to continue. Can't type today. There we go. And we'll use a read key to move on. So console.read key, like that. Okay, and let's go ahead and test that really quickly and see how that looks. So there we go. Let's type in good. It doesn't like that. Let's give it a 6. Here's that you entered the number 6. Press any key to continue. All right, that looks pretty good. I like that. So this is the code that you would use. I should say this code right here, to go ahead and validate an integer. And so you can also imagine that a double would work, a float would work. So in terms of VLSism, this would be a numbery thing. So you could use this pattern here to validate a number type of variable, or validate a number and assign it to a variable. Okay, so let's go ahead and now kind of validate some text and then store it into a Boolean variable. So we're going to actually create another bool variable, and our bool variable is going to be is happy, okay, which is a common way of a common naming convention for a Boolean variable. Is a lot of times you can see this is going to be a yes or no, or a true or false. We do that so that when we read our code, it reads well. So down here, you're going to say do while, and this reads as not valid response. Well, okay, when I read that, I understand without actually looking at the code kind of what's going on. So let's go ahead and do another, create another do statement. Okay, and again, it's going to be while not valid response. Okay. And now there's kind of a gotcha here because I'm using this as a, well, actually it's not a gotcha. I think we're going to be okay. I'm gonna go ahead and there's a couple ways to do this, but let's go ahead and just kind of handle this straightforward first, and then we'll talk about that. So let's do a cdub tab, and we're going to use a real simple. I'm going to get smart this time and get rid of my line, and I'll say, are you happy? Like that. And then we'll go ahead and say user response is equal to console.readline. Smart enough to give me that console read line. Okay, and now what I want to do is kind of take a look at that and say, well, okay, if tab, and if the user response, so I'm going to actually look at the user response and say that's equal to yes, and that's lowercase, then we're going to do something. I'm just going to come and kind of stub this thing out. Else, I lost my, there we go. If, okay, and then I'm going to say user response is equal to no. And then I'm going to come down here, and one last one, I'm just going to build in my default else like that. Okay, so I want to kind of build that structure for you first to see how that goes. Okay, and while I have this here and while it's kind of clean, I want to point out that I am comparing the user response to all lowercase yes and all lowercase no. Now we know it's entirely possible that the user may type, for whatever reason, capital Y and then lowercase es, or they could capitalize all of those. And so because because C# is a case sensitive language, and in terms specifically I should say strings are just case sensitive, that what we want to do is we want to take what the user gave us, and no matter what the case is, just make everything all lowercase. So we keep the letters the same, but we make them all lowercase. And so there is a sorry about that. So there is a method that we can attach right after we do the read line. So go ahead and get a value from the user, and then there's one that's called toLower. There's also a toUpper, and that changes the case. So now everything that the user gives us, we're going to turn it all to lowercase. We're going to assign that to user response, and now we can kind of check user response out. All right, so now if we are there, what we want to do is we want to say is happy is equal to true. Okay, so we're going to assign a value based on the user's response, or we're going to say is happy is equal to false. Okay. Now, if they don't give us a yes in some case or a no in some case, then we didn't really get what we wanted from them. So at this point, we need to kind of provide, again, a handy dandy little feedback. And so we'll do cdub tab, and we'll say, please respond with a, and I'll put these guys in quotes, yes. Notice I'm using single quotes here. There is a way to put double quotes in there. Or no. Like that. Okay? And I will then say, I think I just put the space in here. Console. There we go. So we put that in there. Now, one of the things that we have to think about is, at this point, what is our valid response? Well, interestingly enough, because of the way we have our structure here, it's only going to fall out, because we put this above it, it's only going to fall out of this when valid response is equal to true. So when we enter this, valid response is already equal to true, which means that technically down here is the only place that we would have to assign a value. So if I came down here, I probably should say valid response is equal to false at this point. Okay? I could explicitly come in here and say valid response is equal to true and valid response is equal to true. Or I could, and this is oftentimes the case, I could at the very beginning of my loop just kind of reset the valid response variable and set it equal to true. And now I don't have to explicitly do anything in here, i.e. they did give me either a yes or no. Valid response is going to be equal to true, and it's going to fall out. So remember, this is valid response. So you see these trues and false here. These are is happies. All right, so we have that laid out. And you know what? Now that we know what's going on, let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and copy this code because I'm going to use this as an echo. This is just a demonstration. I'm going to put this in here. It appears that you entered, and in this case, I'm just going to say is happy. Now that's going to read a little weird because it's going to say if they entered true, it's going to say it appears that you entered true, which they didn't really. So we would probably, I suppose we could somehow kind of rewrite that so it makes sense. We could say, I guess let's say it appears, how it appears your happy state is, and we'll put that, so that'll be true or false like that. Okay, so maybe we'll see how this all looks. Now, notice that, again, it's unhappy, and it's saying, if I hover over it, it's saying, hey, you know what, you did not assign this. This is the pre-compiler coming in and saying, even though we know it has a default value, what's happening here is that we didn't kind of assign it explicitly to the default value. And the reason being is because we have this structure right here where it could go in here, is happy gets assigned, or it could go in here, is happy gets assigned, or if it goes in here, is happy is not assigned a value. Now we don't necessarily want to assign a value. So there's a couple ways around that. Oftentimes what I will do is I'll just kind of come up here and give it a value. And I'm okay with that because I know that I'm going to change it. I'm going to change it explicitly here. You could also do that here like we did with the valid response. And in Converse, you could have taken this valid response and moved it up here. So there's a couple different ways to do that, but as long as you kind of get the same flow. So let's go ahead and see how the flow goes. And I'll go ahead and run this. So what's my age? 4. It appears that you entered 4. Are you happy? I'm going to say maybe. And it says please respond with a yes or no. I'm going to say, well, 8. And it says please respond with a yes or no. Well, I'm going to capitalize YES. And it says it appears that your happy state is true. All right. So that seems to do what we want it to do. You now have some code that allows you to validate a numbery thing and also to validate some text. And then also in this case, I'll give you an example of how after validating a yes or no answer, oftentimes when you do that, you don't want to necessarily store it as a yes or store it as a no. It's a really good idea that if you're getting a yes or no response from the user, that you store it in a Boolean variable. All right. So there we go. If you have any questions, give me a call and have a nice day.